Hello, everyone. This is Dennis Mooney from the Power Memorial Alumni Association. In our continuous effort to interview all our Hall of Famers, we have a special guest today. He's used to asking the questions, but today he'll be answering the questions. 2017 Hall of Famer, Steve Kallas. How are you today, Steve?
All good, Dennis. I appreciate you doing this.
Yeah, no, we're looking forward to this. How's it feel being on the other side?
A little more nerve-wracking than being on your side. It's pretty interesting, actually. But, you know, as we tell all the other guys, this is your life. So today's my turn, and I appreciate you doing it.
Great. So, Steve, you know how this works. Why don't you give us a little background on growing up in Inwood, I believe, and how you ended up getting to Power Memorial?
Yeah, I grew up in Inwood. My parents had moved there. I have an older sister and a younger sister then and now. And we lived on the corner of Dyckman Street and Sherman Avenue, which was, as they used to say, a changing neighborhood. But it was a great place to grow up. I lived 2 blocks from the projects, would eventually become friends with a lot of the guys in the projects who went to Power, which we'll get to a little later. But in any event, loved living there, mixed neighborhood. My old man worked at the post office and had an incredible jazz collection. And, you know, once a month, he'd have 10 guys over to the house on Saturday night to play jazz albums. And, you know, always 4 or 5 of the 10 were African-American who worked at the post office, a couple of Puerto Ricans from the neighborhood, a few white guys. I mean, it was a great thing to be around. And then my parents both believed in public school, actually. My mother went to Harran High School, which all the Power guys will remember when we were there, that Harran was like one of the worst schools. Brother Jensen, or a cop, would be on the corner to prevent fights. But when my mother went to Harran, it was like one of the best high schools in the country. She was a very bright woman. And my dad wound up, they both grew up in Hell's Kitchen, but he wound up moving up to either Washington Heights or Inwood, I'm not sure which, but he went to George Washington High School, which was the local high school up in Inwood that you would go to if you went to public school. So when I was like 10 or 11, and this is the white flight time when everybody was leaving the city, we moved 4 blocks. We moved to Vermilion and 204th Street, literally 4 blocks from Dyckman and Sherman. And when I was going to go into 7th grade, my mother was walking down the block past PS 52, which was between Dyckman and Sherman and Vermilion 204th, and somebody threw a chair out the window at her. And if anyone's crazy enough to go look this up, in that year, 66 or whatever it was, 65, 52 was voted the most dangerous middle school in New York City. They had an article in the Post about it. So my mother was like, "You're not going there." And she enrolled me in a private school, McBurney Prep on 63rd, where the Y is today. That's only a few blocks from Power, of course. So 7th and 8th grade, I went to a private school, but because we were poor, by their standards, they gave me half a scholarship, and I wound up paying like $40 a month. And in 8th grade, after 8th grade, they doubled the tuition, didn't raise my scholarship, or during 8th grade, they announced it. My mother's like, "Yeah, you're not going to McBurney Prep next year, take the Catholic school test." Took the test. I remember I put down Regis because of my mother, right? The Brainy school, Regis, Power, Rice, I think maybe Tollentine or Dubois, because again, I lived in Inwood. You can get to Tollentine easy on the 12 bus. You could get to Dubois, which I was like on 145th Street off the A train. And I got into all 4 of those schools. And my mother said, "Oh, you're going to go to Regis. It's the best school." And my father, my father was a very bright guy, but he was the street smart guy. And my mom was, you know, the school genius. She was very bright. And my father was like, "Yeah, but Regis, their sports are terrible." This is, again, 66, 67. And he said, "Yeah, he's going to go to Power. They're good academically, but they're great athletically." And that's how I wound up in Power. I should say here, just to speak briefly about my mom and dad, my dad was a minor league player. My dad grew up in Hell's Kitchen, moved to Washington Heights or Inwood. I never actually asked him. But he grew up he survived that flu. He was like 2 or 3 years old with the great flu epidemic that we hear so much about now. Then he grew up in the Depression. Then he went into World War II for 4 years. And then he got out and worked in the post office, never missed a day of work for like 19 years in a row. And then, I hate to say it this way, but he had a bunch of heart attacks from 65 to 70. And I'll get to it in a minute, but when we talk about Power, but he passed away at the beginning of my senior year at Power. So we wound up, because of my dad, I wound up going to Power. And I should also say, there's a list as long as your arms of Inwood guys who went to Power when I was there. My father was the Pied Piper of baseball, played minor league baseball for 2 years before he got drafted into World War II. And he was a brilliant baseball guy, still to this day, the best I ever met. And I met some brilliant baseball guys. But he, every guy from Inwood who went to Power from my time, he coached them all in baseball. And a lot of them went to Power because of them, not all of them. And I'll throw out a few names. Stephen Ramsey, his father, Buster Ramsey, coached with my dad. They were very tight. Little League, Senior League, blah, 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 all the way through to high school. And Stephen Ramsey, excellent baseball, basketball player at Power, went on to play at Dowling, great guy. But there's so many guys. Henry Norman comes to mind. Butchie Jackson comes to mind. One of my best friends, Julio Alonso, who you know as a star pitcher, who got into the Hall of Fame a few years ago, but unfortunately passed away. Knew he got in, but wasn't there for the induction. Mr. Alonso didn't speak English very well. Julio came up from Cuba, couldn't speak English. We were the same age in the Little League, but he was 2 years behind me in school. And he wound up going to Power, definitely because of my dad. And so many other guys. The Bruin family, Danny Bruin did not go to Power because of my dad, but his big brother played with, Jackie Bruin played with Kareem, went on to coach Colgate and Catholic. The middle brother, Frankie, went. Danny Bruin was a little behind me and a good friend of mine. And I have to thank him and Tom Danko for nominating me and writing letters on my behalf for the Hall of Fame. I didn't even know Danko was doing that. God bless him. But all those Inwood guys, Teddy Sklavos, who played baseball with me at Power and NYU, George Litzios, another guy. There were so many, I'm leaving a ton out. But if you went to Inwood when I was going to Power, my father had coached you in baseball. And I think he steered certain guys to Power, and it was to Power's benefit because so many of those guys were real good guys, real good athletes, baseball, basketball, track, some combination thereof. Was a fantastic place to go to, fantastic place to grow up. I wouldn't trade it for anything, and was very lucky to stay. One final story I'll tell you, when I was 10 years old, this is how narrow-minded we were. When I was 10, my best friend in the Little League came up to me and said, Steve, I got some bad news. I'm moving out. And his father was a super, you know, how he used to walk down the steps in those buildings. He had a crappy apartment. But I was like, where are you moving to? And he goes, I'm moving to Hastings on Hudson. And I said, what, you're going to live on a river? I had no idea what that was. Now, when I moved to the suburbs, obviously Hastings on Hudson is a beautiful town, but we were so Inwood centric, New York City centric. Hastings on Hudson was Albany to us, but that's kind of how it was a fabulous place. We did great in the Little League. We had great teams. We did great in the Babe Ruth League. My father and Mr. Ramsey invented the Bronx Bullets. Most of us were from Manhattan, and on and on and on. We played a lot of baseball. I will say this, because we'll get to it later when we talk about Power. My father never wanted me to play basketball, and I had to sneak out on the sly. Of course, he knew, but he never forbid me, definitely, because if he said never play basketball, back then you listened to your old man, and my old man was a tough but fair guy, I'll say, but he was an old school tough guy. So I had to sneak around even to play ball. But again, I wouldn't trade it for anything. Great place to grow up. Great friends to this day. I still talk to them a lot.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about your days of Power? Now, so you said your dad didn't want you playing basketball.
Right.
You were a baseball player.
Right. And, yeah, Power was the best thing that happened to me. I had Brother Jensen, one of the 5 greatest human beings I've ever met in my life to this day, period. I actually had him for algebra in 9th grade. And I mean, just an incredible man, brilliantly educated, you know, a Latin and Greek scholar. You know, I kind of heard all of that through Power and heard a lot more years later. Stayed in touch with him after high school, just such a help to me in my life. But the first week at Power, room 606, homeroom, I would always sit by the door. If it was first seat, first row, last seat, first row, I was just by the door because I did all my work. I was a good student, but I just went and studied, you know, and I wanted to get out when class was over. And the first week of algebra, he knew that I knew algebra. And the reason I knew algebra was because in 8th grade at the private school, well, they called me the poor kid, by the way. in 8th grade, I took algebra. So when I went to Power, I had a big leg up. And in the first week, Brother Jensen knew there was something. So he called me in after class and I told him the story. And this is how great Brother Jensen is. You'll hear a lot of basketball stories and they're all fantastic. Brother Jensen said, well, I'm going to teach you intermediate algebra on your lunch hour because your lunch hour is my lunch hour. And I'm going to teach you 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And I'm going to teach you 11th grade algebra. And that's what he did. It was just, think of the time for one 98-pound freshman. We'll get into that later. 98-pound freshman, 98-pound weakling. But he took me under his wing. He was so helpful to me. And I'll never forget that. So freshman year was interesting. I was physically overmatched. I don't think anybody knew I was a good athlete to baseball season because I didn't even, try to play basketball. And as a freshman on the JV, I had a really good year. I had a thing, I wish I could find it, I would show it to you. The Power Daily newsletter, it was one page of mimeograph stuff they handed out, at least when I was there. And the first JV game I ever pitched, I threw a 4-hit shutout against LaSalle. And they had it, Steve Kallas, freshman, blah, blah. It was it's like the biggest thing in my life when that kind of stuff happened when you're a freshman in high school. My father, of course, came to every game. He was a taskmaster. And I'll tell you one other story where I sent you the box scores, not to tell anyone at Power, but just to tell you how he was. But in any event, I played baseball. I did really well. Suddenly my gym grades went way up. Coach Malone was the gym teacher. And at the beginning, I got an 80 and 85. I'm a 98-pound weakling. Nobody knows me. And then baseball, he'd come to the JV games if the varsity wasn't playing to watch us. And now suddenly, I can pitch, I can run, I can bunt. And suddenly my grades went up to, 95. Suddenly I was great at gym. But that's how it was at least the first year. But I had a wonderful time. And I'll just give you one quick story, final story about Brother Jensen, because he was the nicest, kindest guy in the world, but he was also a tough guy. And years later, he only wanted to coach freshman basketball. As you know, eventually he coached varsity basketball, where he was the coach of the year one year. He coached baseball, which I'll get into when I go to law school. But we had a guy in the back of our room, Tony Lastra. He's like 6'2", 195 as a freshman. Excellent basketball player. They had to play basketball. Brother Jensen's going to be the freshman coach. And Tony Lastra would be in the back row just messing around. Brother Jensen warned him once, warned him twice, warned him 3 times. I'm sitting in the first row by the door. I could see outside. And one day during class, he wouldn't shut up. And Brother Jensen did this. If Brother Jensen did this to you, it could be bad. I mean, it could be good, but it could be bad. And Brother Jensen took him outside. And I think with full knowledge that I would see it and tell everybody. And he took Tony Lastra, who again, 6'2", 195. Brother Jensen was immensely strong. And I'm going to say he was, 5'8", 5'9". But he was incredibly strong. He used to walk around like this with a 50-pound weight in the gym. I used to walk around trying to do a 10-pound weight in the gym and could barely do it. But Brother Jensen took him outside, and I swear he did it because I was looking at him. He picked up Tony Lastra with one hand and banged him against the locker. And he did it once more. And he said, you ever do this again, you're out of the school. Tony Lastra never did it again. In 2 days, everybody in the school knew about it because of me. I said, man, you can't believe this, Brother Jensen, what he did to Tony Lastra. It was unbelievable. So, and by the way, Tony Lastra played freshman ball, but dropped out of Power after first year. But it was just, Brother Jensen could do stuff. He was not a mean man, but you couldn't cross him. And again, this is the old days. This is the late 60s, man. It was a different world back then. But again, just to show you the both sides of Brother Jensen, kindest man in the world, but you can't cross him. And it was Power in the old days. I don't know if they could do that in the 80s when you were there, Dennis, but
they did.
Went on to something. Go ahead. You want to say something?
No, I was going to say they did. Very similar. Brother
Okay.
Costa, who was good friends with Brother Jensen, had the same style.
Well, I have to say, looking back at it years later, because in our generation, you can't even look at your kids or touch your kids. I mean, and I'm not saying that's wrong, and I'm not saying back then it was right, but it was a great discipline. It was great discipline. I didn't like wearing the jacket and tie. Nobody did. Great discipline. If your hair hit your collar on Thursdays and they needed you to set up bingo, you got jugged. That's just how it was. And if they couldn't find people with the hair on their collar, yeah, your hair's close to the collar, jug, see you in the gym to set up for bingo. That's just how it was. But I think the discipline and the commitment of these guys like Brother Jensen, and I would put him at the top of the list, but there are a lot of others, I think taught me a lot. And I tried to give that to my kids, which, we'll get into later. But power was the best thing for me. Sophomore, I did great on the JV. They brought me up to the varsity as Jensen did, as Coach Malone did with a lot of guys. I was really playing well. I was playing in the summer. I wouldn't play basketball to my senior year. I'll get into that in a minute. But, junior year, they had the greatest team in the history of the world, I think. Was it better than Alcinda's team? That's open for debate. I know Carl Hall, if he's listening, he wants to work on that, but whatever. That junior year, I went to a bunch of games. It was just incredible. Elmore, Searcy, Trimble, I think we've already interviewed 2 of them, but they were an incredible team. Mr. Cunit was the coach. I had Mr. Cunit for intermediate algebra. He was a great coach and a great teacher. And what happened after they had that team, he was from Freehold. Think of the commute, exit 8 on the turnpike, up to Power. He made that commute for a number of years. And after 70, the Freehold job opened, which is why he left. But we used to call him Clark Kent. Big guy, had the dark rimmed glasses, and he would always go like this. And we never knew if he was fixing his glasses or giving this intermediate algebra class the finger. We never knew. We never asked. But he was another good teacher, good coach, went to Freehold, had a good career down there. And his wife, Mrs. Kuhner, and I know she was there when the team got inducted, and I think she's still around. So she comes to a lot of these Hall of Fame reunion dinners. But in any event, junior year, Julio Alonso was a freshman. We were the number 1 and 2 pitchers. Julio, of course, was the number 1 pitcher. He was off the charts. I mean, he was all city freshman, sophomore, and junior year. And I wasn't there for a senior year, but somebody told me he pitched 2 games, so he didn't make all city, but he pitched a 1-hitter and a no-hitter. But when I was there, we won the Bronx Manhattan Championship both years. Unfortunately, we faced a real junk baller who was like me, but probably better. We faced a real junk baller from Severian who beat us both years, and that's why we didn't get any farther than Bronx Manhattan Championship, and we had a bomb squad. I mean, we had an incredible team, and Julio was the superstar of the team. And senior year, we were great as well. We won the fall we played fall ball. And a lot of people say that's why Power became real good at baseball. Brendan Malone is almost more proud of what he did for baseball than basketball, because what he did was incredible. The baseball program was nowhere. And you heard his Hall of Fame speech. He talked more about baseball than basketball because there was no equipment. There was no nothing. He built it from scratch. Now, he did great as the basketball coach as well, but I'm not saying it was already baked in, but you went to Power to play basketball. He had some great teams. My good friend Herbie Rayburn, another guy from Inwood, who my father coached in baseball up in Inwood, he came to Power and gave up baseball and played basketball, became an all-city player, played at, I don't know, FDU or Fairfield, I forget, but another, D1 player, great guy, great ball player, great baseball ball player. When I told the guys on the 72 team who got in the same year as me, I said, you guys should know, Herbie was a great baseball player. And 3 guys came up and said, Herbie played baseball? We never heard. I said, well, like a lot of guys, even back then, he decided to focus on basketball at Power. And one final thing I want to say about the baseball team is the 2 best pitchers I ever faced in my life, and I faced 7 guys who played in the major leagues, were John Candelaria, who as a great basketball player also at LaSalle, and Julio Alonso, who made it to AAA and blew out his arm. But Candelaria, if you read anything about him, it says, oh, he never played baseball in high school. No. He held the rebounding record in New York City for basketball rebounds in high school for decades. I think it was eventually broken. But he was a tremendous, 6'7", 6'8" in high school. He was a tremendous basketball player, tremendous baseball player. The only games he played was when LaSalle played Power. He pitched against us, the scariest thing I ever saw, 6'7", 6'8" guy. Junior year, I'm like 135 pounds now. I'm like, oh my God, look at this guy. Julio Alonso, also lefty, the 2 toughest guys I faced. And just to give you a comparison, I faced Dennis Leonard at Iona in college. Dennis Leonard was a great professional Major League Baseball pitcher. And he was no problem, at least for me. I was lefty. But Candelario and Alonso, or Alonso and Candelario, two best guys I ever faced. And when you read John Candelario didn't play baseball in high school, do not believe it, because he pitched against power every time we played. And I remember we beat him in Central Park once 4-3. And I think he didn't pitch the other game. We killed him down at their place down by Houston Street, down by the river. That's where LaSalle had their home games. I think he did beat us once one year. I'm not really sure. I just remember when we beat him, not surprisingly. But yeah, so it was great playing baseball. And then the final thing I'll talk about at Power, because Power was so helpful to me, which a lot of, well, some guys watching this will know. My dad went into the hospital September of my senior year. He had had a couple of heart attacks when I was in like 7th grade, and then even as a freshman at Power, but it wasn't terrible. We were at a Ranger game in the old garden. My father knew how to sneak down to get autographs. I have the greatest autograph collection in the history of the world, at least for the Rangers and some other guys. But in any event, New Year's Eve, I think it was New Year's Eve, 67. It was going to be 68 the next day. We snuck down to get autographs. My father, for the only time in his life, said, yeah, Steve, let's go. We got to go. I was like, what? I got to get autographs. You know, I'm like 14. And he came again and said, Steve, we got to go. And I knew then something was up. We walked out of the old garden on 50th and 8th. We're walking to the A train. And he would put his arm around me. And again, you know, I was 120 pounds and he was like 200. And there was something wrong. And it was New Year's Eve. So the guys who knew him, because he had sat in the same seat since World War II, hey, Johnny Kallas, Happy New Year. I see you got an early start. They all thought he was drunk. We got home. He took 2 aspirin, got up the next morning, went to the hospital. And the doctor said, good thing you took 2 aspirin, because that was very helpful. You had a heart attack last night. In 1970, he went to the hospital and he had 3 heart attacks in 10 days, passed away October 1st. Saddest day of my life to this day. But the Power community, Coach Malone, I mean, my homeroom came to the wake. The baseball team came to the wake. They wound up putting me on the varsity B because I wanted to play basketball, but I missed tryouts, but I wanted to play. I wanted to do something. They came. I mean, it was just incredible. And I give Coach Malone a lot of credit, as I did in my Hall of Fame speech. He was the guy who took me through the recruiting process for D1 baseball, which even back in 1970 was crazy. I was actually looking to go away once my father passed away. You know, that was out because I had a big sister at Cornell, a little sister in high school. My mother was a 49-year-old widow with 3 teenagers, which I could never fathom till I was like 49 years old with 2 kids. And I was like, how did she do it? But, you know, she was the rock of the family. And so Malone really helped me with the recruiting. I had a real good season. Unfortunately, so my father never wanted me to play basketball because he was afraid I'd get hurt. 3 weeks after he died, I broke my kneecap playing ball. I jumped with a guy, the guys who were there. I jumped with a guy 6'5", 240. Senior year, I was maybe, I don't know, 5'9", 150 maybe. And people over there said, yeah, you were like this. You grabbed the ball, and the guy grabbed the ball, and you just went like this and broke my kneecap. So I actually missed the beginning of the basketball season. And we had 2 brothers coaching, Brother Haynes, Brother Cronin. Malone came to a lot of games when he could, but you know, that was his first year as the varsity coach, 71. But we had a real good year, and I'll say all this for Carl Hall. We hated Malloy. Brenda Malone did not have his camp then. So in that summer before, because I wanted to play ball, but Jack Curran had a camp, actually told my dad it was a baseball camp, but it was a basketball camp. And Malone sent all the Power guys, including me, to Jack Curran's camp. We went up there, Kevin Joyce and Brian Winters, 2 Malloy legends, right? They were both already at, I think, South Carolina. Joyce definitely, I think Winters went there as well. They were both in college. Yeah. They were our counselors. They treated us like crap. You listening to this, Carl? They treated us like crap. They made us run on like gravel in our stocking feet. Swear to God. But it was a great camp. I learned a lot to watch those guys play. You know, the counselors play at the end of the camp every night. To watch those guys and Rudy Bogart, a good big man. It was just an incredible experience. So I did wind up playing varsity B. And the greatest game I ever played in high school was in the semifinals of the city against Malloy. I had like 15 points and 8 or 9 assists. My father, of course, had passed away. Mr. Ramsey drove Stephen Ramsey, who was the star of our team, and me to the game. And, you know, when he dropped me off afterwards, he said, your father would have been very proud of you. I was like so happy. You know, these things mean so much to you when you're in high school, what teachers say, what coaches say. Mr. Ramsey had been my coach for a few years on all-star teams. It meant so much. It so affected me. To this day, I remember it like it was yesterday. So that was pretty much all the sports. I had a real good year my senior year. But one other thing I'll tell you, my father went to high school and was in the Army with Herb Stein. Herb Stein was the scout for Washington Heights and Inwood for the Minnesota Twins. He had signed Rod Carew, so he was already like a god. He signed Carew in like 63, I think. And my father actually got him to watch me play. And he didn't tell me, thankfully. And I had a great game in Central Park. I think we played in the Clancy. But Herb Stein, as I found out later in the year, this is when I was a junior, so I was like 135 pounds. He said, yeah, you know, your son is just too small and we can't teach him anything. That was a great compliment to my dad, because my dad, again, was a tough taskmaster, but a great baseball man. He was a minor league catcher, so the catchers are always the brilliant guys. He taught me how to pitch. The one other baseball story I wanted to tell you from the JV, I pitched against Dubois. I gave up 3 runs in the last inning. I pitched the whole game. We lost 8-7. And I sent you the box score, not to show anybody, but our line was, their line was 8 runs, 8 hits, and our line was 7 runs, 8 hits, 8 errors. We made 8 errors. 2 in the last inning. I still got smacked around. It wasn't like I pitched well. 2 weeks later, we played Dubois again. My father being my father, we went through the whole lineup. Oh, you should throw this guy a hook. Don't throw him a fastball. Don't pitch this guy inside. Pitch him away. He's got too much power. And 2 weeks later, and you've got the box score, I threw a 5-hit shutout. Same team, same 8 guys. The pitchers were different. And I remember thinking at the time, man, this guy's a genius, because he was a genius. But those are my memories. I know Coach Malone talked about a game we were losing 12-1, I think to Tolentine. And he brought me in losing 12-1, and we won 13-12. And he remembered that. I didn't even remember that. Danko talked about it when he introduced me. But Malone, for baseball, he was an excellent baseball coach. I know he had a 30-year career in the NBA, so very few people know that. But he helped me through the recruiting, as you would imagine, and I think I've already told you. Recruiting for me for college was who's going to give me the most money from New York. And while I had offers from like Fordham and Manhattan, they were very low. But Columbia and NYU, they were going to give me a lot of money. NYU was going to give me a full ride. Columbia was going to give me close to a full ride. But close to a full ride after my dad died, you know, my mom got a check from the post office. God bless the union. But it wasn't a lot. So I took the free ride and went to NYU. Coach Malone at the time even said to me, because I guess we'll get to college soon, he said, you know, they're having some problems up there in basketball, Steve. The baseball team seems set. And I said, Coach, I appreciate it, but, you know, whoever offers me the most money, if they offer me exactly the same, I'd probably go to Columbia, Ivy League. They played at Baker Field up in Inwood, which is still there, 3 blocks from my house. But at the end of the day, NYU offered me a free ride, and Columbia didn't. So I wound up going to NYU. But my power experience, I didn't talk anything about academics, but my senior year when my dad died, I barely remember. I was just so, I wanted to play basketball. I wanted to play baseball. I was focused on studies. I can't explain it. You're like in a cocoon when that happens to you, because you just don't want to believe it's true. But I wound up, as you know, graduating second in my class. And I got those beautiful medals for best in athletics and second in my class. You can see them over my shoulder. It's those little things, those little purple things. And as I used to tell people, I love power. I got 2 great awards at power. I could put one in my right pocket, one in my left pocket. I didn't need a 6-foot trophy, but to get that kind of commendation, given the year that I had was really, really incredible. And again, help from all my friends, Stephen Ramsey, especially Julio Alonso, you know, the Inwood guys, help from my friend Pat Joyce, who went to Dubois and that power. You know, it was just incredible because I hung out with some great guys in Inwood. Inwood, as you know, was an Irish neighborhood that was rapidly changing, as they say. But, you know, it didn't matter to me. I lived where I lived. I lived on the wrong side of Broadway, apparently, and the wrong side of 207th Street, but I loved it there. and made a lot of great friends, many of which I speak to this day. So, I graduated high school. I was very happy. I was very sad because my dad had kind of hung over me for, literally, I'd say a year or two, including my freshman year at NYU. But was lucky to get a free ride to NYU. They had the campus up in the Bronx back then, at least for the next 2 years. But, by the time I got to college, I was doing better, but was still, as I said in my Hall of Fame speech, 10 months after my father died, I was in college at NYU, taking 18 credits like an idiot first semester, because they told me, D1 baseball is a job, which it is. So I could only take 12 credits my second semester. Not the greatest decision in the world, but Power, I'm the luckiest man on earth to have gone to Power. I have a lot of friends to this day. And I can't say enough good things about it, but Brother Jensen and then Coach Malone and a few others, were incredibly helpful to me. And I think shaped me, frankly. Coach Malone was like a second dad to me after my dad died, and really steered me through that final year. So I'm eternally grateful to him, and more than eternally grateful to Brother Jensen, because he was there freshman year, sophomore year, junior year, senior year. He's one in a million. I hope we get to do an interview about him, even though unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago.
I was going to say that you're the third person who speaks very glowingly of Brother Jensen. The guys in the 80s are a little jealous that he was moved out. We didn't get to experience that. So now you're finishing up at Power. You decide on NYU, like you said, because of the free ride and stuff, and you go to play for Coach Musio, right? I believe.
Yeah.
There. But Malone was right. Basketball was in trouble. Was it there your first year and then it was dissolved?
It was supposed to be there. And Mike Musio, who was my college coach in D1 baseball, basketball, which by then had become a club team. I'll just talk about that briefly. And I was on the bowling team, which, by the way, I bowled 1 year at Power. I think they only had a bowling team for 1 year. I'm not sure. I should mention that because bowling is a big part of my life as well. But he got us money to go to the national finals in bowling. But Mike Musio was a guy who played at NYU in the late 50s with Sat Sanders and Cal Ramsey. And then he became Lou Rossini's top assistant in the 60s when NYU had a bomb squad. Barry Kramer led the nation in scoring, blah, blah, blah. And then in, I think it was 70, 71. So I got out in 71. So he was literally named the new head coach of NYU's varsity basketball team. And then a month later, they dropped basketball. And I think you spoke to Coach Musio. He came to my, thank God, he came to my Hall of Fame induction at Power, and is such a great guy and so helpful to me in college. And again, I was still coming out of this, my father passed away funk. It really messed me up for a good year, if not more. But Mike Musio was a great player in his own right, baseball and basketball, one of the few guys. He went to the College World Series as a player, baseball player, went to the College World Series as a coach. I mean, what a resume he's got. But in any event, he took me under his wing. He knew the whole story. He had come to recruit me. He came to a game in Central Park. I played out of my mind. Just, I think, lucky. I don't think I knew he was there. I think my father would ever tell me that stuff. He didn't want to make me nervous, I think. But, and because of him, I'm sure I got the free ride offer. But he was always good to me. My freshman year in baseball, I was like a caged lion. So they had a travel team and they had a JV. I was on the JV. I dressed for all home games at the beginning of the year, but I didn't go to away games, which made my head explode. Now, I show up in college, I'm 150 pounds. I'm still a shrimp.
Right.
I talked to scouts over the year, which I'll get into a little later. They were always bigger than me. And the knock on me was I was too small, which always infuriated me. So a chip on my shoulder my whole life, baseball, basketball, bowling, chip on my shoulder to this day. But freshman year in limited at bats on the varsity, I was hitting like 400 on the JV. Limited at bats, I was hitting, I think I sent you a little picture. I hit like 625. It was like, but it was only, I don't know, 15 or 20 at bats or something. And my personal pet peeve I got called out on bunts that I was safe on all the time, to the point by college. I don't know if Coach Malone did this, maybe, but in college and in Sandlot ball, when I'll get to the Parade Grounds League later, the coach would go up to the ump before the game and say, "You don't know this kid, he could run like the wind." My main attribute as an athlete was incredible speed. I mean, faster than everybody. Just whoever you think is fast, let's go race. I used to later, when I worked at the racetrack, which I think we'll get to, I used to race guys for money, and I never lost because they're like, "You're a white guy. How can you beat these guys?" But that's a different story. But it was so bad that if I laid down a bunt and the guy picked it up cleanly through the first, they'd call me out, even if I was safe by half a step. So they started warning people. In any event, I'm hitting 600 or whatever, and they start to bring me to the away games. I remember going down to the Naval Academy. I remember going up to West Point. And I'll just give you one story about my first varsity appearance in NYU, because I had a great season, but I didn't play enough. We had a doubleheader at NYU against Penn. We went to Florida for spring training, big time program. I played great down there. Was sitting on the bench, opening day, made my head explode. But I'm a 150-pound freshman. Who am I? Skinny, maybe 5'9" by then, 5'9", 150. So, this is D1 baseball. But in any event, I'm sitting on the bench the whole first game. It's, 38 degrees. Playing 9 innings the first game, 7 innings the second. Sitting on the bench the second game, and in like the third or fourth inning, the coach says, not Musio. Actually, the manager was a guy named Larry Gerashati, but Musio really did like all the real coaching, in my opinion anyway. But the manager comes up and says, "Steve, go out and warm up. You're going to pitch the next inning," because I was a pitcher too. I was much better in center field, batting. I was a much better pitcher. I was a junk ball pitcher in high school and get away with it. In college, you'll hear the story and you know why it wasn't so great. I run out to warm up. As I'm running out, they go, "Steve, come back in and pinch hit, you're up next." I'm like, really? I've been sitting on the bench 3 hours, 3.5 hours. There's a half an hour between games. It's 38 degrees. But I go up, my first college at bat ever. I hit a fastball up the middle. I get a single. I'm the happiest man on earth. I wind up being stranded on base. I walk to the mound with no warm-up pitches to pitch in my first game, and the cleanup hitter for Penn is leading off. I throw 8 pitches, warm up, that's all I got. And I go in my mind, I go, screw this, I'm just going to reach back and throw as hard as I can. I reach back and throw as hard as I can. The guy was like a little bit ahead of it.
Wow.
So I'm like, yeah, I might have a problem here in college. It's a true story. The cleanup hitter for Penn, big, bulky, strong guy. But, I pitched pretty well. But knew obviously, I had pinpoint control. I could throw it anywhere. But my mother told me I broke my left arm. I was a lefty. I broke my left arm as I was like 6 and didn't tell her, just how crazy I was. And she found out when she was trying to put my winter coat on, and I started screaming when I put my arm back in the car. I don't remember that, but I thought I had a good arm when I was 5 and 6. In Manhattan, you're throwing balls off the point. You're trying to roof it. That's just how it was. We used to go out with a Spalding and throw 500 times a day. Routine.
I was going to ask you about that just real quick. I don't want to interrupt a sec, but you're talking about throwing the Spalding. Rumor has it you had great control with the Spalding. Played in junior high school park against some firemen. Is that true?
The firehouse, I'm familiar. So I moved from Sherman and Dykeman to 204th and Vermillion. The firehouse was across the street from 52, from the junior high school. We used to play roller hockey there, basketball there, stickball there. And yeah, we played against the firemen. Sometimes it was, bounce the ball twice and hit it. But other times it was pitch into a box. And I had an incredible curveball with a Spalding, and I had great control. And the firemen were the greatest guys. Firehouse, of course, is still there. It's one of the few, schools, banks, and firehouses are kind of the remaining things in Inwood. You can't find a store that was open except Pizza Haven on 207th and Broadway. But other than that, there's like no places left. But in any event, I played a lot of stickball, as we all did. I mean, this is what you did when you were a kid. If you had the 25-cent Spalding, get the hard one, not the soft one. No Pensy Pinskys or whatever. They were phonies. And, we literally got broomsticks. Towards the end, they started to make those stickball bats with the tape on the end that you would buy. But we were like, I'm not paying a quarter for that or 50 cents. We use broomsticks, literally. And that's another, hand-eye coordination, learn to hit corners. I found it very, very helpful. And I played with some great stickball players as well, but it was usually the same guys, many of whom went to Power. And it was just kind of a thing that everybody did. And the firemen, again, they'd buy the Spaldings for us. We'd have to run and get them, but they'd pay for, it wasn't a big deal for them. But yeah, they were very nice guys. And, to this day, to me, heroes, because those are the guys, along with the police, who literally put their lives on the line every day. And it's becoming harder and harder now, I guess. But it was even dangerous back then. But yeah, I played a lot of stickball with those guys. And again, I was back then, we had moved, I was like 13, 14, played roller hockey down there. We had a great time. I played in a few basketball leagues on the sly. And again, I played on a team with Herbie. We had a bomb squad when I was like 15, 16. But yeah, whatever. So in college, the other thing I want to tell you is when you play D1, even back then, you have to literally sign something that says, I'm not going to work anywhere else. I'm not going to do this. I'm going to devote all these hours to this, blah, 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 blah. And my freshman year in college, we had no money. My dad had passed away. My mom, who had always worked part-time, 2 weeks after he died, my mom went to work full-time. But again, she already had now 2 in college and 1 in high school. And so I signed the thing and I had a job at the liquor store off the books. And, I just went to the liquor store and worked whenever I could, usually Saturday nights after baseball games from like 6 to 10, sometimes Friday nights. But, I worked whenever I could work, gave all the cash to my mother. I should mention here my 2 sisters. I have an older sister, Christine, a younger sister, Ellen, both of them well-educated. My big sister has a law degree. My little sister has a master's, I think in special ed or ed, was a teacher forever. They were always very supportive of me when I was growing up. My little sister to this day tells me stories about Little League games and Junior League games and Senior League games. I don't even remember. But she went to all the games. Both of them were very supportive. So I was very lucky to have 2 sisters. I wish I had a brother, as many guys do, I guess. Either a little brother or a big brother, because it would have been interesting to go through high school life, either helping somebody or being helped. But, I did get a lot of help from the adults, my dad's, Mr. Ramsey, Mr. Alonzo, and a few other guys as well. But yeah, so after freshman year of college, Coach Musio called me and said, Steve, you played out of your mind good. You're a starter next year. I want you to go see this guy, Ray Brienza. And some people might know Ray Brienza as a sports writer for the paper in New Jersey. I forget the name of it, for like 40 years. He was also the financial guy at NYU who you'd go see. And because I had such a great year, he actually got me a stipend. I was getting like $120 a month in a check, sophomore, junior, and senior year of college. And he also gave me a job opening the gym for $4 an hour. I opened the gym, threw the balls out, stayed for 3 hours, either played ball or studied, closed the gym, and I got paid $4 an hour when the minimum wage, I'm going to guess, was like, I don't know, $2 an hour.
I know it was $3.35 when I was in high school. So
maybe it was $2.25, whatever. They really took care of me.
Did you give up the liquor store job?
I kept the liquor store job, but I worked less hours.
Right.
Especially after that, because, that was better money than I was making at the liquor store.
Yeah. The coach tells me that you told him you were a 200 bowler and that you guys should go to he paid for you guys to go to the playoffs, right? Or what was it considered, the championship round?
That was my junior year. Back then, I wish I was a 200 bowler, but which I am now, which I'll bore you with later. But back then, if you averaged 200 or a little more, you were a pro. This is totally different. This is in the 70s now. We bowled at Bowlmore, the NYU team. We bowled at Bowlmore, which was the toughest lanes in the Northeast. All the pros bowled there, and they averaged 200. I love the coach, but I averaged like 180, and that was really, really good back then. Now if it's 180, even if it's 200, that's good. Because the bowls are so different. I don't want to go too deep into bowling, but in college, there were 24 regions in the country. and we won the Eastern Intercollegiate Bowling League. And there were like 20 schools in that league. We bowled at Baltimore, toughest house around. And that made us eligible to go to the semis. And the semis were the 12 lowest teams had to go to the 12 highest teams and bowl them. And the 12 winners went to Dayton for the national championships. Since we had the lowest average, we went to the highest average, which was West Virginia University. And we went down to Wheeling, West Virginia, I think it was. And we had a student coach named Charlie Engelberg, who to this day is a good friend of mine and was an excellent bowler, an excellent coach, captain. He was everything. And we had a really good team. The interesting thing is, because we bowled at Baltimore, it looked like we stunk. We had the lowest average of the 24 schools. If these guys all came and bowled at Baltimore, they wouldn't bowl much, if any, better than we did. They just didn't know it. We go to West Virginia. It's tied to the last game, to the last frame. And another friend of mine, Barry Charles, who I still see today up at the racetrack, which we'll get to later, he stood up in the last bowler, the last frame, the 10th frame, and if he threw 3 strikes, we win and go to Dayton. If he throws 29, we're tied and we go into an overtime in bowling. If he throws 28 or less, which is 2 strikes and 8, we lose. He threw 3 strikes and he won us a free trip to Dayton. But we had no money. We had no coach. I went to Mike Musio, as to Charlie Engelberg, and I was like, yeah, we need to go. Musio got us the money, and we had to take the swimming coach with us. I knew the swimming coach a little, but I certainly wasn't, a swimmer or anything. But he was a little 5'6" guy. He stood up in the stands the whole tournament and said, go NYU, go NYU. So Charlie Engelberg was the coach, the captain, the psychiatrist, and a real good bowler. And we went out there. I think we finished like 6th in the country, but I bowled the best I ever bowled in my life. When we went there, they had a pro tournament. So we went into the locker room one day after Earl Anthony, Johnny Petraglia, Mark Roth, 3 of the greatest bowlers who ever lived. And Petraglia was my hero. He was from Brooklyn and lefty. Earl Anthony was maybe the greatest bowler ever, and he was a lefty. And Mark Roth was the coolest of the bunch. He was the young, big stud who threw a big hook. He was from Brooklyn. He actually took our whole team to Burger King for dinner. I remember like it was yesterday. The bill was $21 for 7 people. I'll never forget. I'm like, this guy's buying us dinner at Burger King. That's how whack we were. But when we walked in that first time and saw it, we had NYU on our jerseys, and Petraglia said, are you guys from New York? I was like, yeah, we're from New York. And he goes, yeah, you're not going to like the way they oil the lanes out here. I had no idea what he was talking about. But the way they oil the lanes is differently in different places. And we kind of struggled. Now, lefties have an advantage because most of the guys are righty and the lanes get all chewed up or stuff. But I was pretty much the lone lefty, and I bowled great. I remember the New York Post, Charlie had a hook there, and they put an article in, Steve Kallas shot 243 today, which, at the time was incredible, to lead NYU to blah, 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 blah. But that's the best I ever bowled, certainly from a high school, college competition perspective. And yeah, so Musio got us the money to go there. So certainly I'm eternally grateful to him for that as well. But, we also had a club basketball team. 2 guys stayed from the NYU varsity. So that first year we had a bomb squad. We had 2 D1 players, and I was the point guard.
You were the playmaker.
Yeah, I was the playmaker.
Coach Musio, yeah.
I was the playmaker. And I was a pretty good basketball player. I never got the coaching because I never really played. I never played for Brother Jensen or any of the other coaches till I was a senior. And Malone helped me a little bit. I did go to the current basketball camp. That was very interesting as well. But I was a real good street player. I go down and play on West 4th Street. When I was in college, the day of the blackout, I'll give you one more college story. When I was in college, the day of the blackout, after 2 years, they sold the campus. I had to go down to West 4th. And again, I was a pretty good student in college, not as good as at Power, but I was playing D1 baseball, and that was a job. I was playing basketball, and that was a job. I was bowling, and that was a job. But the day of the blackout, 1977, I was actually, well, I guess that's a law school story, but I'll give it to you because it's a basketball story. I got to first year law school at Fordham. I was going to transfer to the day school. I had to take 2 summer courses. Fordham didn't have a summer school. NYU did. I was only 1 year removed. I got a room in my old fraternity, which was just the baseball fraternity. I got a room for $50 for the summer. The day of the blackout, there were no classes. I went down to West 4th Street to play. Now, you probably know a lot of white guys don't go down to West 4th Street to play. And when you're picking up sides at the beginning, if they don't know you. So I was there real early, but there was a guy there who I knew from my neighborhood named Nuki. I can't remember his real name. Henry Norman told it to me recently, another friend from Power in the projects. And I knew the guys who were there because I was playing there a lot because I was living there for the summer. And I thought I should have been like the second pick, maybe the third. And Nuki picked me last. I was livid. And we played for 5 hours. We never lost. If you lost on West 4th Street, you sat for, hour and a half, 2 hours. We played for 5 hours. The only reason we came off is because they had the West 4th Street League. And they had to set up for that. They had scorers. It was a big deal. And that's the only reason we got beat. After 5 hours, I was livid. And I went up to Nuki. I said, Nuki, man, really? You picked me last? I was better than everybody but you and whoever he picked first. And he looked at me and said, Steve, you're white. Nobody's going to pick you except me. So my anger kind of went away. And it's one of the best memories ever because, again, people don't play for 5 hours down there. But I was down there a lot that summer. But, basketball. I love
drafting technique, though.
Huh?
You got to give him credit for his drafting technique.
Oh, 100%. Never even entered my mind. Never even entered my mind. They always say basketball is a meritocracy, right? Yeah. Best players play. Best players get picked in the order they are. I wasn't the best player. Those top 4 or 5 guys were better than me, but I was good. And I was a good street player. I played a lot of street ball.
Now you say you end up at Fordham Law, and there's a law. Is there a law team?
Yes. I don't think I told you about that. I go to Fordham Law School, and here's what happens. I'm working at the track. I got into the horses because my friends took me up to Yonkers at Old Timers Night, a dime for a soda, quarter for a hot dog. I loved it. And
that was going to be my question. How did you get into horses from Inwood?
Pat Joyce and I think Mike Clow it was, maybe Mark Lowy. They took me up there at Old Timers Day. I'd never been, knew nothing about it. I looked at the program. There was one horse who was first in the lead for every race he was on. So I bet him and he won. Unbeknownst to me, they had moved him up in class, but he won. And I think he paid like $8. I'm like, this is easy. Just pick the guy with all the ones, blah, blah, blah. And a few weeks later, while I was at NYU, they had a thing in the New York Post. If you're in college and you want to be in a harness race, come out to Roosevelt Raceway. We'll teach you how to drive. And you know me a little bit. I was game for that guy. I went the next day. I didn't even tell my friends. I told them the day after. They were livid with me. But they all went out too. Mike Clow, Mark Lowy, they all got on. They went out too. I know Mike got in the race and actually won. But I was in the race. They put you in with 14-year-old horses who are the oldest horses. And they drove us around. We didn't drive around. But after that, I was hooked. I went and worked with the guy who helped train me, Lou Miller, and Joanne Foster. They were very helpful. And eventually I got a job with a guy named Joe Feraldo. There's still today Joe Feraldo, the lawyer, but this was his cousin, Joe Feraldo, the trainer driver. I started working at the track. I was hooked. My final year of college, I made all my courses 3 o'clock or later. And my first year of law school, I went to school at night. And I worked at the racetrack during the day. And you go to law school and the people who go at night, total respect for them. They work all day, but they're like accountants, bankers, paralegals. What do you do? I work for Chase Bank. I work for Merrill Lynch. What do you do, Steve? Yeah, I'm taking care of 2 horses at Yonkers. And, they look at you like you had 6 heads. But all true. I was totally hooked. But at the end of my first year of law school at Fordham, Fordham ran the shuttle, Fordham right next to Power. And I'll just quickly go back. I'm probably talking too much, but I do want to talk about this briefly. When they started building Fordham, the Jesuits, the guys at Power, the Irish Christian brothers, went to Fordham and said, we got a high school here. We're going from 8:30 to 2:30. Can you not drill during that time? And the Jesuits said, no, we got to build this school. My senior year at Power, all I remember is drilling all day. It was terrible. Then when they closed the windows, you sweat like a pig, no air conditioning. So that was my last 2 years. I go to NYU, and then I go to Fordham Law School, and for 6 weeks, maybe I should ask President Chick Pisani about this. For 6 weeks, they marched around in front of Fordham Law School And they practice in front of the law school for 2 hours for 6 weeks before St. Patrick's Day, which I always viewed to be the payback for them, drilling during power hours. Now, Danny Bruin was a year or two behind me. He was there at the same time. And a guy named Ray Slattery, who was a year behind me and went to Fordham Law, he was a year behind me, a power baseball player, I think from Hell's Kitchen, went to Fordham Law. We were the only guys who kind of lived through this, and Ray and I got it on both ends. Flash forward to, what does that plaque say? 2002, they put the very nice plaque up at the back of Fordham about power. It's beautiful. I just went there with my son like a month ago.
Oh, yeah.
And they had the ceremony. Danny and I went. It was a love fest. Everybody loved each other. I turned to Danny. I go, well, hold it now. Back when we were in high school, they wouldn't even stop drilling. Back when I was in law school, Powell would march the band in front of the law school. It was just so funny. But that's, now everybody loves everybody, I guess.
Funny too, for Power expected the construction to stop from 8 to 2:30. Started
Yeah.
3 o'clock. Started
We
3
were
o'clock in
told-
the afternoon.
We were told they asked from 8:30 to 2:30.
Right.
That's what we were told.
Yeah, no, it's so now there's a lawyers league, right? You don't go far from Power these years. You're around the corner. You're in the gym.
We're playing the Lawyers League games at Power. It's the greatest thing in the world.
Right.
But we only played the playoffs in the full court. As you know, we played the 2 side courts because you could have 2 games at once. But yeah, when I was in law school, I played on a bomb squad team. In 1978, we went to the National Law School Championship up at Western New England College. And we played St. John's in the semi, and St. John's had 3 guys from the St. John's varsity who had gone to St. John's Law School. They had a bomb squad. But we had a bomb squad. We had a guy named Billy Finger, who was the captain of Penn when Penn went to the Final Four. We had a guy named Mark Gallagher, who was an all-city basketball player at Malloy and then went to Georgetown. We had a guy named Peter Crean, who played with Bernie and Ernie and then transferred to UMass and was the high scorer. We have Billy Marr, one of my best friends in law school, who played at Middlebury. We had Steve Barada, who was a 4-year player at Lafayette, and I played the point pretty much. And we had a bomb squad, and we had the nastiest, most physical game ever in the semis, and we beat them. And we killed whoever in the finals. I'll have to go back to varsity B and tell Carl Hall, after we beat Malloy in the semis, we lost the finals, and I don't even remember to this day who we played. So we got beat in the varsity B finals when I was a senior at Power. But yeah, we had a bomb squad. I was in a great Lawyers League because I could play in an open team with those guys, and we played. I remember Ernie Cobb was playing in the league because he was a paralegal after he had that gambling issue. He was the last cut of the Nats. He was incredible. I mean, it was great stuff. But yeah, we played 90% of our games. I even played in intramurals for the law school league. I was in the night school. And what I should tell you, first year of law school, I don't want to do law school too much, but the final week before Easter vacation, the final day, Fordham had a shuttle from Fordham downtown up to Fordham in the Bronx. And we lived 15 minutes from that. I called all my friends in Inwood because you can get them in for free. We went to Fordham and we played basketball for 3 hours. Then you could take the shuttle back. I went home to Inwood. And then the last day, the Friday before Easter vacation, the last game, the last shot, I took a jumper. I came down on the guy's foot and broke my ankle. And I hadn't missed a day of class. So the guy gave me crutches and I asked my friend to drive me down so I wouldn't miss a day of class. And I didn't miss a day of class. But because of that, I lost my job at the track the next day. You can't walk. You know, I got my final paycheck. The guy said, come back when you can walk. And then I studied for 6 weeks and I think I made law review, which is the best you can do in first year. And it's something you really want to do. You know, I pretty much stayed home and studied for 6 weeks. I couldn't do anything. So, you know, I'm not trying to make less.
Go back a second. Your dad didn't want you to play basketball because he didn't want you to get hurt. You've been hurt twice now.
No, it's a lot more than twice, but yes.
But major injuries from basketball.
3 weeks after I broke my kneecap, I was sure it was him. I was sure it was him. I'll give you one quick story that people may not believe, but I believe it. The day my father died, it was 3 a.m. I was sleeping in the living room. I got the phone call. We had no idea. Nobody said, he's really sick. You got to be worried, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But he died. Went down, we took a cab to the hospital. Nobody took a cab anywhere back then, right? But, took a cab to the hospital. I felt what dead weight is. I lifted up his arm. I don't know if you know what dead weight is. I didn't. His arm felt like it was 50 pounds. But, it was a terrible time. And we go home. We get home by like, I don't know, 9 o'clock. 5 minutes later, knock on my door. Mrs. Peters lived downstairs from us, had 3 daughters, worked at the local bakery, the quintessential Irish Catholic, straight up mother, religious, never did a thing wrong. Her husband wasn't around. I don't know if he had passed away. Knock on the door. It's Mrs. Peters. I answer the door. Is your mother home? What am I going to say? My dad just died. Leave me alone. I say, Mom, it's Mrs. Peters. She comes to the door. Mrs. Peters goes, did your husband get home okay last night? And my mother's like, we just came back from the hospital. He's dead. And she goes, what are you talking about? Mrs. Peters said, he knocked on my door last night about 3 a.m. I opened the door and I said, you're in the wrong place. You live 1 flight upstairs. He turned around and walked away. This is the straightest, narrowest, salt of the earth woman you can. This was not a woman who had 1 ounce of craziness in her. So ever since that day, I believe in all this. What I told my kids was, if there's one human being who lived who could get back from the dead, it's like my old man, because that's just kind of how he was.
Right.
And she swore till we moved out of there, which was a few years later. But she swore that he had done that. We were living on Familia at the time, and I was like a little creeped out. But that's what I was thinking at the time. Yeah, if you can get back from the dead, my old man will get back from the dead. Now, you can throw that anywhere you want. But to this day, when I hear wacky stories and people talk about, they see the white lights flashing and their life goes before their eyes, I believe all that stuff. I really do. But that's just another crazy story about my dad. But in any event,
But you finished up Fordham Law.
yeah,
right?
I made law review, which really opened a lot of doors for me. I was a real good student. I became president of the night section because I transferred to the day. Nobody in the night section wanted to do it. So while it's an impressive line on my resume, it was really like, yeah, Steve could do it. He's going to day school now. But yeah, I had interviews with big firms. I worked for a few judges. Between my second and third year, I worked for a federal judge and a state judge. That set me up real well for interviews. I got a couple of offers from some really top big firms. I was hoping to clerk for a federal judge. I had a resume good enough to get a bunch of interviews, but I actually didn't get a federal clerkship, which is what you strive for. And just one quick story about that. I was working at the track my first year, but my second year when I transferred, I would work on vacations. I would do this, I would do that. I was still always around the track, and Roosevelt Raceway at the time was open. And there was one federal judge who was in the courthouse across the street from Roosevelt Raceway. I went there and had an interview. It was the greatest interview of my life. And my dream was, as sick as this is, to get up at 5, work at the track till 9, cross the street, clerk for a federal judge till 5 or 6, come back to the track, race horses at night as a groom, take them to the paddock. And I had the greatest interview of my life. I was sure I had a chance. Didn't get it. I was so good with the clerks. This is after being there for 2 hours one day. I called the clerk up. I said, I'm sorry. I know you had 100 applicants, but this is the best interview I had by a mile. What happened? And the guy said, well, to be honest, the judge loved you, but he wanted to hire a guy who lives in Long Island. And I obviously didn't tell him I could live across the street at Roosevelt Raceway. I still had, I think we had maybe moved to 5009 Broadway by then, still in Inwood. But I live at the racetrack. But if I had, Dennis, but that's just another, that's another crazy story. But I got a job at a fantastic, I graduated high up in my class, but law review was the main thing. And I got a great job at a big firm where my best friend from law school was going. And I decided to go there, and I hated it. And so now I'm in the law world. I'm making good money, but they do things like on Wall Street. Oh, if you need an advance on your salary for clothing or something, we'll give you your first paycheck. Do you want that? I'm like, yeah, I want that. I got one suit. Again, this is just how it is, man. If you went to Power, I didn't have a wardrobe of suits. I had one suit for all the interviews. And, but I worked there for 6 months, hated it, was working 60, 70, 80 hours a week. Didn't even care about that. It really wasn't fun for me. I kind of went in with the wrong attitude. I didn't think I was a big firm guy. You're in there with a bunch of rich kids, a bunch of blue bloods. But I didn't like it. And here's what happens. I wound up just quitting without another job. And I called my evidence professor, Pete Putzel at law school, who was kind of, I won't say it was Malone or Musio, but he was the guy who helped me out a lot in law school with jobs, take this one, take that one. But my best friend from law school went somewhere else, didn't even come to the firm I was at, which really disappointed me, but whatever. But he got me an interview the next week at a place called Grand and Ostrow, one of the top white collar boutique firms, 5 lawyers, small. And I walked in and they had a encyclopedia of the racehorse outside on the shelf before I walked in. So I picked it up, I walked in, I said, well, why do you guys have this? And you may remember these guys, it's from the 80s. Other guys will, but at the time, Angel Cordero and Jorge Velasquez were the 2 greatest jockeys in thoroughbreds in the world. And I knew a lot about the thoroughbreds. I had worked at the regular track, at the harness track. And they walked in and they told me, Shea and Gould, another great boutique firm, Shea being Shea from Shea Stadium, Milton Gould being one of the best defense lawyers ever in New York. They gave us one of the guys, they gave us Cordero. And I said, you got to be kidding me. I worked at the harness track. I did this. I followed the thoroughbreds. I go to the blah, 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 blah. And the guy said, well, could you give me a memo, for example, on 10 ways you could lose a race without a jockey pulling back on the horse? Because that was what they were accused of. And I said, 10, I can give you 50. They hired me on the spot before I left. And a week later, I gave them a thing with 50 ways you could lose a race. And just to flash forward, it was the best job I ever had. But to flash forward a couple of years, they were threatening to pull their license. They never did. It's very hard to prove that. And these guys were the 2 best jockeys in the world. I can't believe they would fix races. And I don't believe that they did. Although that's always the knock on horse racing. But in any event, that was the best law job I ever had by 20 miles. I worked there a couple of years, 3 years. And then I'll never forget, it was 2 a.m. They were threatening to pull the licenses of Cordero and Velasquez. I was working with a wonderful woman from Shea and Gould. We had killed ourselves for 2 years. We're writing papers because the rumor was they was going to pull their license. And then I said, no, this is the best it's ever going to be for me. And I just don't like it. So we finished that. They didn't pull their licenses. And I just decided I was going to leave the law and go work at the racetrack.
Wow.
I think I'm talking too much here, Dennis. So
That's fine. You tell them the story. That's what we're here for.
I'll cut the racetrack stuff shorter.
I
I went to work full time at the racetrack. It was easy to get a job. I was a hard.
have that written down. How do you go from being a lawyer to working at a racetrack?
Well,
Like,
that's the story.
it's an easy progression. I see how you end up there.
Well, the story was it was 2 a.m. I was working on the best case I was ever going to work out with a wonderful woman who was an associate at another firm, representing the second or first greatest jockey who ever lived or who was racing at the time. And I was like, the problem is, and I'll give you the perfect analogy. The problem is you get a rush when you practice law, but it's after you work on the case for 3 months. It's none of these 1 hour stuff on TV. 6 months, a year, 2 years, 5 years. You win, you get the rush. You win a motion, you get a little rush. But when you work at the track and drive horses, as eventually I did, when you win a race, you're the high school kid who hit the jumper to win the game. Or
Right.
you're the baseball player who got the hit to win the game in the bottom of the ninth. It's whatever that rush was you got. A lot of people tell me they get it from cocaine. I never was a cocaine guy. But the rush that you got in high school, you get when you win a race. Even if you were the trainer at the beginning, you got to train and let other guys drive. But when I started driving my own and had wins, I got the rush. I was hooked. And that's the real reason, because I took highest paid salary you could get for a young lawyer on Wall Street to making I think I was making like $250 a week or something. But I climbed the ladder in harness racing. First I was a groom. Then I was for Joe Feraldo and then Billy Popfinger. Billy Popfinger was a great horseman who just got into the Hall of Fame finally. I took care of a real good horse for him, and that's how you become a second trainer. I trained for him for a little bit, and then I went with my childhood friend, Mark Lowy, who opened his own stable. I was a second trainer for him for a few years, and then we were out at the Poconos. I started to get some drives. You got to climb the ladder in driving. You get a P license, provisional. I'm sorry, you get a Q license, a qualifying license, where when you're going to drive in a qualifying race in the morning, not for money, just to qualify a horse in a certain time, the judge watches you. And you got to go to the judge afterwards and he gives you a check or an X. And back then, I think you had to get, I don't remember if it was 12 or 20, but you needed 12 or 20 of those. Then you got a P license, provisional. You still couldn't drive at Yonkers or Roosevelt or the Meadowlands, which is where I wanted to drive, because Yonkers is 10 minutes from where I grew up. The Meadowlands was becoming the king of everything when it finally opened. And I got all that done at the Poconos, and it was good that I was at the Poconos, because then I could get some drives for guys. I would go feed for them, or I would beg them, or I knew a couple of guys. And I was always in the paddock to warm up horses at the Meadowlands and at the Poconos. So eventually I got my P license, and then I had to go get, I think it was 25 drives, might have been more. Again, you got to, it's essentially for safety. It's not even whether you're real good or not. It's kind of, you didn't cause an accident, you didn't cut anyone off, you didn't hurt anybody. I was game, but I was pretty careful. But in any event, I started to get a bunch of P drives. The only story I'll tell you about that is I knew a guy who was up in Hinsdale, New Hampshire. They race for like $500 a race up there, which means if you win, you get 5% of the purse, of half the purse. So a $500 race, your horse wins, he gets $250. You get 5% of that, you get $12.50 if you win. If you come in fifth, you get 5% of that. And fifth place on a $500 race was like, I don't know, $25. You get like $5 or something. I mean, but you want those drives. So I drove up, I was working at the Meadowlands training for Mark. And I drove up, I did the guy's stalls Saturday. I slept in a truck. I got up Sunday morning, did all his stalls, and he let me drive in a $500 race. He had two. So I drove up there like 4 or 5 times and did that to get like 10 drives. And I don't know if I made $150 that whole time, but it didn't matter because I was getting drives. And up there, the drivers aren't as good, the money isn't as good, the horses aren't as good, but this is the kind of stuff you have to do. And eventually at the Poconos, which is a little better, and I knew a few guys there, I start to get, and it was the guy at the Poconos, Judge Ridgway, who actually gave me my A license, which I still have to this day. And then I started driving a little. I moved to Monticello, the dumbest thing I ever did, 87, 88. I stayed there for the winter, the dumbest thing I ever did. The first month I lived there in the winter, my electric bill was higher than my rent because I turned on all the electric things I didn't know. Then I turned them all off except for one room. I had one room heated in my apartment for the whole winter. But, I did a little good there. I got a few cheap horses. I knew some guys. And here's what happened, how I got back into the law. I knew a lawyer, Lenny Glass, who was a wealthy guy and a game guy. He had sponsored our Lawyers League team. And he said, "Oh, Steve, I look in the New York Law Journal. I see Lenny Glass above Cravath, Swain, and Moore, Hughes, Hubbard, and Reed, all the big Cahill, Gordon." So I went to lunch with him to try and get him to buy some horses. And he said, "Yeah, I'll do that. But I really need a lawyer part-time. Will you come back and practice bankruptcy law with me?" And I said, "Well, I'm living up in Monticello. Bankruptcy law, I really don't know that much." "Steve, we'll teach you everything you have to know." He said, "Can you come down a few days a week?" And I said, "Well, I can come down a few days a week. If I can come in later, I got to get up every day at 4 and work in Monticello." He said, "Okay, can you do Monday, Wednesday, and Friday? I'll pay you $1,000 a week." $1,000 a week back then was pretty good money. And where I was working, because now I'm paying myself, Steve Kallas stable, I was maybe making $250 a week. So I said, "Yeah, I'll do that." So 3 days a week, I got up at 4. I probably left Monticello at 9, went home, put on a suit, drove from Monticello to 40th and Lex. And I did that and made $1,000 a week and got some more horses. It was all going pretty well. And then what happened was my owner in Long Island, the Denham stable, Seymour Panuski, a wonderful guy, was one of my best friends at NYU. He owned a bunch of horses and he got me some decent horses, but he wanted me to be closer. He was in Monticello in the summer, but he wanted me to be closer. So I went to Goshen, which was an hour from New York, which helped me get down to the city. But then Christmas, I think it was 89 Christmas. the guy who took care of the track was a genius. Hard to keep care of these tracks in the winter. He went in and asked for a $20 raise. They wouldn't give it to him, so he quit. In 2 weeks, you couldn't train on the track. So I went from Goshen to the Meadowlands, probably a little earlier than I should have. And I had a couple of horses who could race at the Meadowlands. I was starting to drive at the Meadowlands. And in my fourth start at the Meadowlands, I think it was my fourth start, I won by a nose with a real nice horse named KGZ Thunder. It's on YouTube somewhere. And I beat a Hall of Fame driver by a nose, and I got a little recognition. I preferred going to Yonkers where it was a little less competitive. I won a couple races over there. And that just kind of started it, where I could eventually have 7 or 8 at the Meadowlands and was competitive, but certainly was not doing great. I mean, you have, the greatest drivers in the world, John Campbell, Bill O'Donnell, Mike LaChance. Even at Yonkers, they had great drivers. So eventually what happened was I got married in 91. I had a kid in 92, kid in 94. And, you got to make a decision.
Yes.
And I actually decided to go back to where I was full time, where they were paying me $1,000 a week, and I got a nice raise. And I worked at the successor firm to them as well. But it was still 60, 70 hours a week, maybe not 80, but you were on call all the time. Now I got 2 little kids. We had moved to Millwood, which is in Chappaqua, and you got to make a decision. My ex-wife was an excellent lawyer, had her own real nice job, but I had to decide, am I going to work this life and make a ton of money? Or am I going to try and cut back and have a normal or more normal life and see my kids grow up? So one of my best friends from lawyer, who I mentioned before, Billy Moore, who had played basketball at Middlebury, he had become the town judge up in Peekskill, which is literally 12 minutes from where I had moved to. And I went to meet with him, and eventually we worked out an agreement, and we opened up Mar in Kallas. He was Mar. He was the local court judge in Peekskill. I, of course, was Kallas. And we opened up a firm there. I wanted to say it was probably like 95, 96. I wanted to see my kids grow up. My son was already like 5. And that worked out great because I worked, it's not a 9-to-5 job, but it's maybe 9 to 6, 9 to 7, but you can leave. Your kid has a game, you can leave. You want to work Saturdays at home, you can do that. And so we're probably partners for like 8 or 9 years. It was great. But then I wound up in the early 2000s going out on my own, which I still do to this day. I still do a little legal work. And I loved it. And I'll say it again, we moved from Chappaqua to Ridgefield, Connecticut. That was kind of not a great drive from Ridgefield, Connecticut to Peekskill. But it worked out fine. It was 1 lane for like whatever it was, 25 miles. But Ridgefield was a nice place. But we wound up in Edgemont. It was too far from the city. We wound up at Edgemont for the schools. Edgemont is right next to Scarsdale. It's really a school district. It's not a town. I give my son credit because when he went to pro tournaments, he became a much better bowler than me. But when he goes to tournaments, he puts he's from Edgemont, New York. There is no such place. But he went to Edgemont High School. I should mention my kids briefly here because they've been fantastic, because I think we're kind of getting to the end. Again, I hope it's not too long. But my son, Johnny, wonderful kid, good athlete, good baseball player, but a great bowler. And he bowled in high school. He bowled in college at Oberlin, and he did really well. He wound up after Oberlin going to, he goes to pro tournaments. He's kind of middle of the pack bowler. Hurt his wrist recently. I think he's going to get back into it now. I wrecked my back. I'm trying to get back into it now, but I don't know if that's going to work or not. But whatever. Excellent student at Oberlin, decided to become a labor union organizer after school. God bless him. And helped home healthcare workers get a big raise in Cleveland, Ohio first. Oberlin's right outside of Cleveland. Then he got a promotion to Memphis, Tennessee. Did that for a year. Went out to California to represent nurses in Oakland. And then decided to go to grad school. Right now he's up at, God bless him, he's up at Cornell getting a PhD. Still wants to help the little guys. That's his life. And I have tremendous respect for her. My daughter, same kind of thing, went to Williams, did great, top student, as Johnny was, but she's a crazy good student. Got a Fulbright fellowship to Greece, and wound up living 10 minutes from my cousin from Mount Vernon, whose father moved him to Greece 40 years ago. So she was set the whole time she was there. went to London School of Economics for a master's. Now she works for Asylum Access, helping international refugees. It's kind of funny. She does nothing at the US-Mexico border, but we think what we think it is or what we've heard. And my daughter says, Daddy, in the overall scheme of things, the US-Mexico border is a blip on the international immigration problem. There's 1 million people coming from Syria. There's hundreds of thousands coming from, I hope I get the countries right, Venezuela or wherever. It's very interesting, but she's also decided she wants to help people less fortunate than she is. And she wound up with this Asylum Access, a nonprofit that helps international refugees. That's fabulous. So I couldn't be more proud of my 2 kids. She was a good athlete in high school as well. You know, I say the best accomplishment of my life is look at those 2 kids, and I'm so happy they are the way they are. And I was so thrilled that they came to the Hall of Fame. And thankfully, my son taped that 4-minute and 23-second speech I gave after Tom Danko, God bless him, spoke for 10 minutes. But it was well worth it. So I'm thrilled they could be there. They met Mike Musio. They met Brenda Malone. When Musio and Malone, who both grew up in Queens, were talking about CYO games from the 1950s. You know, my son and I stood there, my jaw was dropping. I'm like, 1955, you guys remember those games? But of course, we remember, right? I remember games I was in when I was 12 or 14 to this day, but it was just so funny to see it there. But, you know, that was a great day. My Facebook picture or whatever they call it is myself at Power getting in that day with my 2 kids. That's, you know, that's the greatest thing. So I was thrilled they could be there, and they're wonderful kids now, you know, mid to late 20s, both in New York City right now for a year. Best thing that's ever happened to me, because you don't usually get those times after they get out of college. But at least I have some time with them now. I spend a lot of time with them, and I'm very happy about it.
Well, before we wrap it up, you kind of remind me a little of Jap Trimble with the different jobs you've gone into in the different fields. So you go back into lawyering, but then you eventually start to do some sports writing, some online stuff, right? I believe you're at the Post Weekly. You wrote for MSG Online, and you do some call-ins for FAN, if I'm not. You know what's probably the best way to start this? Why don't you go to the I think it's FAN with Rick Wolf, and talk a little bit about the Little League with that.
Yeah, well, what happened was, I'm glad you reminded me of this. I'll again try and keep it short, because and I'm not Jap Trimble. He had like real jobs. I wouldn't work at the track. but when my kids were very young, I heard Rick Wolf on the radio. He, to this day, does a fantastic show. I recommend to anybody who has a kid or a grandkid or coaches kids, has anything to do with kids, from the time they're 5 years old through college. Rick Wolf, the Sports Edge, Sunday mornings, was 20 years ago and is now the best show on WFAN. And if you need some guidance or help, you should listen to that show. It's on, depending on the season, either 7 to 8 Sunday mornings or 8 to 9 Sunday mornings. He does a fantastic judge, and I heard him by accident. My kids were like 3 and 5. And I remember I did write a couple of letters to him. I called in. I was also feeding Mushnick sports stuff, Phil Mushnick of the Post. He got me a tryout in 2000 at the New York Post Sports Week, which was a standalone sports edition of the Post that lasted 1 year. It was once a week. It was like $1.50. Mushnick got me a tryout. I wrote a practice column. The guy hired me, and I had a column, Kallas Remarks. And in that column, I wrote, the best show on FAN is Rick Wolf's Sports Edge. And I sent it to him, and I called in. We became friends. We exchanged correspondence. And Rick eventually would call me up. Could I be a Sports in the Law guest? Could I sub-host? Could I be a sub-host for him? So it really, thanks to Rick, really climbed the ladder where I was pretty much a regular, and was very proud of the New York Post Sports Week. And I had interviewed Jim Cott for my 50-second article. It was open for a year, and then I wasn't there, but I heard Rupert Murdoch came to town and said, so what's the revenue on New York Post Sports Week? And they had sold like, I don't know, 40,000 copies or 50,000 copies a week after a year for like $1.50. I don't know. I know it's New York, but that sounds good to me. And then he said, well, then what's the ad revenue? And I don't know what the ad revenue is, but they told him, and he went like this, supposedly, like Caesar. And he just ended it. Now for the 52nd week, the guy was like the main head of the whole thing, had gone to Florida for a golf vacation. He called him up on the golf course and said, we're not even printing the 52nd week. I had a beautiful article where I'd spoken to Jim Cott, who was working for MSG. I had gotten his number from Mike McCarthy, who was in charge of MSG at the time. And the article was, can anyone ever win 30 games again? And the answer was no, because they went from a 4-man rotation to a 5-man rotation. I wrote that article. And then even in the article, I said, the question is, will anyone ever win 25 games again? And that's going to be very hard. And nobody has since, I think, Steve Stone in 1990. So I called up Mike McCarthy. I said, Mike, I got this great article, but I got nowhere to go. They canceled it. And he said, that's so funny, Steve. We're opening up MSG Network's website. Why don't you come work for us? And that can be your first article. And I'll put you on TV. I was like, wow. So I got on TV. Marv was supposed to be there. Marv was like my hero from like the 60s when he was doing hockey for the Rangers and nobody even knew who he was. My old man used to bring me down the way to sneak down in the Yellow Garden was to stop at the radio guys. And we used to speak to Marv before he was Marv. And he would say to me, oh, you want a program from, hockey, Saturday night, hockey night in Canada. So it'd be Saturday night in Montreal, Sunday night against the Canadians in the Garden or the Maple Leafs. And he'd say, I'll go down there, Foster Hewitt, it'll give you a program from last night. And I still have like 20 of them from the night before. It's incredible. But in any event, so I started doing all this stuff. And eventually my big break, which I spoke to you about, was in 2008. So I would do sports in the law with Rick Wolf or just youth sports because I had kids, 8 and 10, 9 and 11, 10 and 12. I got in a few times to sub-host for them. I really wanted to do sports alone. And in 2008, Plaxico shot himself. And Rick Wolf had put me on a list I didn't even know. Over the weekend, Thanksgiving weekend, I was up in Connecticut. My son was bowling in some tournament at Nutmeg Bowl. I had no phone service inside, but I went out between games because it's an all-day thing. And I walked outside, my phone rang. It was Al Dukes, who to this day is the producer, first of Boomer and Carton, now of Boomer and Geo. And he said, can you come on Monday on FAN and talk about Plaxico? I said, sure. They couldn't get anybody else. So I went on Monday. I just had a gun case by accident in White Plains, so I knew the law had changed. I knew Plaxico was doing 2 years if he pleaded guilty. If he had done it 6 months earlier, he would have got probation. I told him about the changes and Mayor Bloomberg and blah, blah, blah. And an hour later, they had a much bigger shot than I, who shall remain nameless, who got on and said, oh, Plaxico has no problem, he'll get probation. He was looking at the old law. Al Dukes called me at 10, just tell me, did this guy make a fool of himself? Yeah, he's looking at the old law. An hour later, he calls me and said, ESPN just called me, can I give him your phone number? I said, yeah, if ESPN calls, you don't have to call me, just give him my phone number. I went on with Sage Steeles in the afternoon by phone, and she asked me at the end, do you think he's going to do time? I said, yeah, I think he's going to do time, because if he pleads guilty, he's doing 2. If he goes to trial and loses, he's going to lose because he had the gun. All he needed was possession of the gun. You didn't have to shoot it. He's doing 3.5. And so then Mike Francesa's producer called me, and they called me and said, he's not doing probation? I said, no, he's doing 2. That's online somewhere, Steve Kallas with Mike Francesa. And I went on and said the same thing. And that started like 9 years at FAN of doing all the legal work. I covered the A-Rod arbitration. I covered the Mets Madoff. I started to do some TV at SNY. By the way, if you ever get the chance, TV is where the money is, not radio. But I got paid at MSG. I signed a few contracts at FAN. I got paid incredibly well at SNY to do Mets Madoff, A-Rod stuff. It was like a whirlwind for 9 years. And then a few years ago, it just kind of dried up. Things changed at FAN. They didn't pay you to write. I wrote a little bit for them, but they didn't pay you like MSG did, like the Post did. So I stopped doing that. And then now what I have, I do some sports. Janelle Albritton, she owns WestchesterCountyPost.com. She does Speaking of Wellness. I do Speaking of Sports. She put me on Facebook for the first time. A lot of power guys in our group. Speaking of Sports with Steve Kallas. I encourage you guys to join if you like sports. Got like 350 people after a year and a little bit. I do a little law work. I do a little sports work. eventually I got some chances to do sports shows on FAN. Never could get hired as a regular, but couldn't really do it during the week because I was working full time. But I've done a lot of stuff. I did sportstalknetwork.com, lunch hour, 5 days a week for 3 years. I do the FDH Lounge with my good friend Rick Morris out in Cleveland. I do ESPN radio in Philly with Joe Stazak, who's a regular down there for 4 years now. And every week I do a podcast with Joe, 30 minutes, all sports all the time. We put it up at Speaking of Sports with Steve Kallas. And we get a lot of comments, good, bad, and indifferent. So I think that kind of sums it up for me. I apologize if I spoke too much, but I think that's everything, unless you know something I forgot, because I almost skipped all the writing and TV. I was on 2 TV shows. I did an American Greed on David Brooks, which is sometimes still shown on repeat. And I did a show called Momsters. One show, Roseanne Barr was the host, and we had a Little League woman in Long Island who threatened to kill her son's Little League coach because he didn't pick him for the All-Star team. Those 2 great shows. I don't know if they're findable. American Greed, it's still on once in a while. The guy always comes to me the next day. I saw you on TV. I didn't know you when you did that. You did that? That kind of stuff.
Right,
but
right.
I think that's everything, Dennis.
That's it? You sure? Well, I'll throw out that you didn't throw out about what you're doing with sports. You also do a football preview show with your son, Johnny, do you not?
I should give Johnny a lot of credit. You're totally right. And God bless Johnny. He knows football, especially Patriots and the Bucks. Unfortunately, when I was a kid, you rooted for who your father rooted for. But he got hooked on the Patriots, Drew Bledsoe on video games, and now knows more about Joe Stazak on ESPN radio. Calls him up every year, Patriots, Eagles. Anytime the Patriots were in the Super Bowl, or even last year with Tampa Bay. Yeah, I've done a ton of videos, and I give Janelle Albritton credit for that because she suggested it. I've done some videos with her on kind of wellness stuff, CTE, and that kind of stuff. With Johnny, I do previews, football, basketball, some baseball. He's great on all those sports. He's a pretty good player himself now. He's playing a lot now as he gets into his 20s. But yeah, he knows stuff that I can't even remember. So I give him credit because when he's like this, forget about it. He knows more than he can break stuff down. He's still telling me stuff about Patriots games from 15 years ago. I'm like, how do you remember that stuff? But yeah, I do a lot with him. I do Joe Stazak every week. I've done a bunch of stuff with Janelle, and I give her credit for suggesting Johnny. And now Johnny has been he invented this labor strike tracker for Cornell, where he's a grad student. And he recently, because of all the labor strikes and everybody's quitting their job, he's got mini viral. He got quoted in the New York Times and the Los Angeles Times. He was on TV a few times. So yeah, but the reason I bring that up is because of the stuff he did with me. You're kind of relaxed, you're talking with your dad, but you're analyzing stuff like this, basketball, mostly football, Super Bowls. To me, he just seemed at ease when he started doing this stuff for real and what he does. And I think that was very, very helpful to him. So yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up because I should have brought that up because he's real good at what he does in school, but he's real good with the sports stuff. And I think both my kids have a bright future.
Great. Well, I want to thank you and let you know that you take this seat back after this interview as we move forward with other Hall of Famers. I will take this job back one more time when we do the Brother Jensen interview, so you guys can focus on that. But other than that, I want to thank everyone and have a good day.
Thank you.
All right, awesome.